an international organization that supports research, practice, education, and advocacy on the significance, experience, and meaning of the built environment. It is the only organization of its type that addresses the spiritual and cultural aspects of the built environment. Today, it's a multi-faith global community of scholars, educators, and practitioners from 56 countries. Over to Michael Crosbie, who will be moderating today. He's currently professor of architecture at the University of Hartford, where he teaches a course on architecture and film. He serves as editor of Faith and Form, which is now part of the magazine Sacred Places. Mike is the author, editor, and contributor to more than 75 books on architecture, including 6 on religious architecture and hundreds of articles on architecture, design, and practice. He's a recipient of the Edward S. Frey Memorial Award in recognition of the contributions made to religion, art, and architecture bestowed by the American Institute of Architects.
I'm really happy to see everybody here. We're going to have a discussion with Nili Portugali. Nili Portugali is with us this afternoon. And Nili is an architect, and she's an author and a filmmaker. And I'm going to ask Nili actually to introduce herself a bit about her life and her career. So I'm going to turn it over to her, and then we will get into our discussion of her beautiful film. Nili?
So good day to everybody. Now, before I will say a few words on the film, I would like really to thank Professor Julio Bermudez for his many efforts for this event to happen, and to Professor Crosbie and Professor Thomas Berry for their part. I came to create my film not from the film industry, but from the world of architecture, which is part of the art world in general. And I always, by the way, thought that architecture should also be taught in art schools and not in technological institutes, though I was teaching in both. I'm a practicing architect living in Tel Aviv, and I was a senior lecturer in Bezalel Academy for Art and Design in Jerusalem, and at the Technion Institute of Technology in Haifa. Now, in the early 80s, I did selected postgraduate studies in UC Berkeley in architecture and Buddhism, as well as studies, research, and work with Christopher Alexander at his center in Berkeley. And since then, my main focus was really in implementing into practice the holistic phenomenological approach to architecture in the actual buildings that I designed in my studio in Israel. So film is, in fact, I would say, the third of a trilogy, following the buildings I designed and the published books that I wrote. And as you saw, the question that engaged me in the world of architecture and art, the film deals with them as well, but of course in a different way. I'm 7th generation descendant of a family living in the holy Kabbalah city of Tzfat, Israel, since the early 19th century. And this was the world that had the most impact on my worldview as a whole. And when I started to think about the film, I knew that there will be a substantial connection between what I've experienced and absorbed as a child in Tzfat and my present point of view on architecture and art, which undoubtedly, derived also from this place. But moreover, when from maybe my present scientific, I would say, point of view, I understood that what I've experienced unconsciously as a child in Tzfat is not a subjective phenomenon, due only, to my intimate relationship to the place but rather a universal and objective one. And now I will be very happy, to answer to any question that you may have after you watched the film.
Nili, I thank you very much for the introduction. It's great to learn a little bit more about you and your life. What I would just like to start by giving just a few impressions of the film that sort of came to me. I watched the film 4 times. It's really such a beautiful film. I sort of couldn't get enough of it, actually, and I wanted to share with everybody, as everyone here who has seen the film knows, that the film is really about a quest. It starts with a quest, and the quest is, as we see this car driving along the road, Nili asks the question, what's at the base of all those places in which man feels at home? And those great buildings of the past, the cities, the villages, tents, and temples that we want to return to again and again. And what's that way that is thousands of years old that created them in any place, in any culture, at any time? So she beautifully starts this film with this idea of going on a quest, on a journey. And she takes us back to her village. It's that in Israel. And we are with her as she moves through her childhood, sort of back into her childhood. And I was impressed by, as I watched this, I was impressed with, I called this, as I was watching, I said, this is a slow film. It's like slow food, it's sort of made of local ingredients. It's made with a lot of love. It's made with some very, very old recipes. And it's a slow film. It's a quiet film. What impressed me was how long the minutes we spend in this film just listening to things happening with no dialogue whatsoever, and which is very, very unlike most film experiences these days. Most film experiences we have, they are just jam-packed with noise and all sorts of things going on simultaneously. So it was a relief and a blessing, I think, to watch your film over and over, because it was like a prayer in a sense. It had that kind of intensity. There were very slow camera movements, which I loved, and it was just very tactile. There were a lot of amazing sounds. You could feel that wall as you traced your hand along it as a young girl, and with the traces of your grandmother's paint still on that wall. So it had a lot of layers, and I wanted to know what it was that sort of inspired you to search for architecture and to render the result of your search in this film through film. Architects often write books about their work. You've not only written about your work, but you chose to also talk about architecture through film. And what led you to that journey?
Well, what I had to do really, or to do with what I think, or what I did research and etc. on architecture, I think I did through, my design in the buildings, or through what I was, writing in the books that I published. So if it was only for that, I don't think I would do a film. But then, as I said, and also if it was just about childhood memories, I don't think I would do a film. But the idea was really how to embody or to combine the two. As I knew from the beginning that this was actually the purpose of doing the film, is really to combine, from my present point of view, how really I see all these childhood memories, or what the insights that I really got already in Sfat as a whole, in the lanes, in the streets, the way that my grandmother was doing the things, which I thought, this is the way art, architecture, anything should be done. Like she was peeling the apple or whitewashing the wall. So actually the idea was really to give my present, because, my grandmother never thought about herself this way, to really, from my present point of view, after the scientific world, Buddhism, and all of that, to interpret my present point of view, this whole world, that I was really experiencing, luckily, in Sfat when I was a child. So now I thought that, film was really the best tool in terms of media, medium to do it, of course, because, a film is really something that, as you said, it's visual, it is sound. I mean, you can almost smell the food. You listen to all these things. So this was really the right media. So then I, started. I never studied film while doing the thing, and I did most of the things I did myself, the editing and all, many things that the directors normally in the industry don't do. But I studied the whole process, along, and I really enjoyed the process. So, so this is the reason that I did it.
Let me ask you, as a filmmaker and as an architect, what kinds of things do those two activities share, and how are they the same, and how are they different? Making architecture and making film.
I did many things, along the way. I mean, in architecture, writing books. In my books, I did the layout, the graphic design, and all of these things. I can really say that in all the domains of art, there are more things in common than not. I mean, of course, there are sort of technical things that one must learn, and not all of them I did. Of course, I didn't know the cinematography. But beside that, I brought to the film my experience that I had in architecture, in the way that I see space, in the way that I, the small details, I mean, or the whole world view. Now I'm writing a book about it. About what you are asking, because you see, as opposed to the way that films are done in the film industry, in the film industry, it's very fragmented and very chronological. I mean, you do the shooting, and then you do the editing, and then you do the sound, and the process of additions always, you add things. Whereas I regard architecture as the process, as I said in the film, of differentiation. Mm-hmm. And I think that the way that I did the film myself was very different fundamentally from the way that if I would study film, because I really did the film as I do architecture, always in layers, dealing with the whole. I mean, so because I think that each detail, even the sound, the colors, everything in a film, like the details in architecture, has to be always there, even in different levels of scale. I mean, I'm not saying, I mean, even like in a sketch, but all of them, because it's really about the interrelationship between the parts, and it's in architecture, and I think it's the same in film. So in that sense, it was very much the same, and the process took a long time. Now these days, they talk a lot about the connection between architecture and filmmaking and all of this, because in architecture, you know, you deal with spaces and also in film. But as I said, I think it's much more deeper than that. So, so for me, it was not a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
Not a big difference, although, as I said, you know, I mean, technically you have to cope with many new things that you don't, but luckily I was the producer also, not maybe by coincidence, so I could lead the process, because, you know, they would never let me lead such a process, because also it's money. They don't do all this cosmetic stuff and tuning the colors and the sound at a very early stage. But I think that unless you do it, unless you put the sound and the colors and everything from the beginning, you don't get the feeling of the whole.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you know, because I was leading the process as I wanted, I could do it.
Yeah. There's a really wonderful sequence in your film where your grandmother is peeling the apples. And you're talking about the idea of practicing the release from attachments and freeing the self. And you talk about the fact that she did this daily on her own, and she did it without being very self-conscious about it at all, right? This was something that I think the word you use is absent-mindedly. It was something that she got into. And as you can see her peeling these apples and then dropping them into the pot of water. I love the way that sequences into you walking on that hillside with the same stool that your grandmother is sitting on. And you put that stool down. I call it the sort of the seat of wisdom in a way. This stool sort of keeps reoccurring in the film. And you are making architecture in that scene. You're sitting there, you're moving around on the hillside, and you start banging those rods into the ground, and you're framing. You're beginning to frame. You're actually creating a mise en scène of the way a director does, right? And there's just something so poetic about, at the point where you believe that you're getting into that headspace that you need to get into to do this, you overlay the image of the apples in the pot over yourself in that sequence. And then we really begin to understand how you're connecting back to your grandmother and how she operated. It's just such a wonderful sequence in the film that I'm wondering, how did these things come to you as you were creating this film?
Well, it's not from the beginning. I mean, you see, it was very clear to me the scenes, or I would say the activities that I wanted to show in the film.
Yeah.
Okay. So first, you know, so we did the shootings of all of that and the childhood memories, and then there was, you know, me, you know, in very small parts, you know, working on the site, but the most difficult thing was how to connect the two. Even they were very, you know, the childhood memories or the activities and all of that was very realistic. I mean, other things, you know, I mean, about architecture, part of it was very abstract. Mm-hmm. And also I was very free. I mean, I could connect, as you say, I could connect the apples to, I don't think, or to this, to that. I mean, you know, I had to decide. And this was the essay, you know, this was the essay work. I mean, I was working on voiceover mm-hmm. for maybe a year only on that, mm-hmm. Because I wanted to give also minimum voiceover. I didn't want it to be overloaded with, and then I had to decide, you know, and where to put this voice over here or there, or so slowly, it was really back and forth, looking at it, and no, yes, and like this, until I felt that, it was the right, interwoven, or how between the things. But what actually connected the scenes, or the association that, you saw in the film, is really to do with the subtext. What I wanted really to say in that thing. When I show my grandmother, even, whitewashing the wall with light blue, that thing, I mean, the main thing was really to show the state of mind that she was in doing the things. It's like giving to God, I mean, she was really in a state like people are doing, I don't know, icons or whatever.
Yeah.
Which is the opposite of being, with ego. I mean, it's really brought her to enlightenment. And then, because it's really a universal thing, it's not. So I showed the Tanga painter,
Yeah.
the Tibetan Tanga painter, which is the same. I mean, it's the same state of mind. So this was the way that I combined the things, and she was really immersed in peeling the apple. She was really immersed. I mean, it was really a meditation, what you call in Buddhism, you have all kind of meditation. You have that you think about it, or you have analytical meditation, which actually by doing something, it's a meditation, she was like meditating.
Yeah.
And when you're working on the site, it's not really meditation, but you really also have to be detached from all preconception. You really have to be connected to the voices, the hidden voices and the visible voices that are on the site itself. Because if you want to do a building which is related to the environment, so in that sense, you have to be in a very similar state of mind.
Yeah. You call that the giving God state of mind, right? In the film.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought it was a beautiful phrase. I thought this idea of the giving God. How did you do you use that phrase a lot when you're talking to yourself?
Well, I mean, I think that if you look at works of art, maybe more, of course, from the past, you find that, people who were more religious, or more connected to tradition, or whatever you call it, and yeah, and did all these beautiful things, artifacts and
Mhm.
stuff. They were, it's like a Hermann Hesse book. Oh, how do you call it in English? No, how do this book, the famous book of Hermann Hesse? I mean, they really, I think these are the most beautiful thing. Or what I showed in the film, or this, the cross that you see in the Greek islands, on the way, all these things. I mean, you feel that these things was not generated by, the sort of personal vision of the creator or whatever, or the ego, or all of these things. No, he was really detached from himself and was really focusing what has to be done. And I think that this is a giving God state of mind. I don't know. I think lead to the places that really has spiritual, and you have this emotional experience in them.
No, there's a really wonderful part when you say that the houses that we want to return to again and again were not designed by people who desired architectural icons, that that what they were aspired to was a great human reality in which we all feel at home. And that's a hard nut for a lot of architects to accept, actually. to come to that realization and then to embrace it.
Mhm.
It's not easy because we kind of get educated in icon making. It's one of the unfortunate things about architectural education. Julio, you had a question that you wanted to share.
I appreciated your film for some of the reasons that Mike brought up. It's a really contemplative experience to see your film. It really slows you down, and it's really about embodiment and emotions, really, that an intuition that you bring the viewer into your family. Really, it's a very, you at the end of the film, I'm part of your family. I mean, it's beautiful. I've been to Safed, and I know that place is quite incredible. And I think what came up for me was this state of meditation that you say, and it was this piercing through these powerful insights, words that came, and I find one comment is I find this kind of dichotomy of suddenly, this incredibly brilliant insight, which is sometimes academic mind want to dwell on, but then the reality of life, which is much more significant and thicker than words. So that one thing that came up, and I wanted you to comment on more on that. How you pick those insightful comments. That's one thing. The other thing that came up, I wanted to know if there was any film that you were being influenced, or you based, using architecture, we have precedents, right? There's some architecture that can inspire us or make us think. And the one that came for me, not necessarily because, in any particular way I could say more, but it's about The Great Beauty by Paolo Sorrentino, the beautiful film in 2013. Parts of that movie remind me of your film. So I was wondering if there is any other film or anything that actually influenced you or you thought about. Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Mainly, I would say, really, I learned the profession from watching films. From watching films, specifically oriented, to my film. I was not, I was not going always to movies and stuff like that. But when I did my movie, I was actually looking for films who has the kind of feeling or that, I was trying to do myself. And I was sitting, in the archive for months and months. Now, the films really that had more impact on me, of course, Tarkovsky, the Russian one, the Japanese films. There is the beautiful film that you must see, The Island, which was done in the 60s. It's a silent film, which was done beautiful. There was also a film by an architect. He was originally an architect, but then he switched to filmmaker, Italian one, Michelangelo Framantero, and his film, Le Quattro Volte, which is also a silent film, amazing. Once you see this, you understand that this film was done not by someone who comes officially from the film industry. Mm-hmm. Amazing, a beautiful film. The Russians are really good, and the Japanese from the Far East. And these were basically more and more, also from Georgia, or the Iranian ones, also very good. So all this kind, but of course I was looking for these kind of films, very artistic films, and very slow, some of them silent. At first I wanted to make a silent film, but then, to convey everything in visuals. But then I understood, when I showed people, here and there on the way, I understood that it won't work because it was not clear enough. Mm-hmm. So I did really the minimum I had to do in voiceover, which is only about 17 minutes out of the 70s only of voiceover. Mm-hmm. The Greek one, Angelopoulos. I mean, all films. I mean, all these people are amazing. So these are the kind of classics. I think they're really cult films that I learned from. And
No, I was asking about the choice of the wording, the insights that you brought in, and how you drop them, because they come they're very intense, because you had to read them in English because I don't understand Yiddish. So it's suddenly I'm in the state of meditation, and suddenly I'm dropped into this very powerful insight that it takes me a while to get in, and then suddenly I'm out. And then you bring me in again. So it's kind of when you meditate, that's what happens. Your mind goes, and then you have to kind of bring it back. But there was some sort of going on.
I found that one of the screenings that I did of your film is I just read the subtitles. I didn't actually look at the screen very much. I just went through the whole film and just read all the subtitles. Then I could go back and experience the film knowing that I knew what you were talking about already.
The text was taken from the books that I wrote.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I had to minimize it, I mean, but it's not that, the subtext was invented for the film, no.
Yeah.
Of course not. But yeah, but I had to work on it because I wanted to be, I mean, the subtitle, it's not a lecture, it's not a book.
Yeah.
So really, it has to be very short, very clear. So this was actually the thing. So, it started to be more, and then minimum. I had to work a lot on it. I had to work a lot on this, I would say, essay, or this way of putting the essay in the film.
Mm-hmm.
So the basic ideas were not new. I mean, but each sentence, maybe was a chapter in my book.
Thank you so much for the film. It was a really moving experience to watch it. I confess it was an exciting moment to see all of you come together and to see the film last night. I wanted to ask a slightly different direction, and I apologize if it distracts from the conversation a little bit, but because I found it really a great conversation. I love the question about silent versus non-silent and your decision to keep it non-silent, because I found personally, I found the words very moving, but also the scenes were so powerful even without the words. And so I'm happy to hear about that. But on a possibly different direction, it was really beautiful to see your grandmother. I mean, to me, she was the star of the show, of the film, and the lifestyle that you portrayed so beautifully. It was hard to tell for me what was a more powerfully spiritual space, some of the spiritual spaces you showed, or her kitchen, which was so profoundly moving, functional, and this work of art and this temple in which she would practice her so-called meditations. But I also think it's really important to acknowledge that that work she was doing was extraordinary. The lifelong legacy of that work that she was doing was absolutely extraordinary. There were references to her, your grandfather, great-grandparents, it appeared that she had been led and trained and bred and accepted her role as the cook, as the keeper of the kitchen, as the keeper of the alley, and of all of the things that we might call women's work, so to speak. And as a woman watching it and knowing it was made by a woman architect and her granddaughter, who was also, I couldn't help but notice, sense sort of being, if you will, trained or bred or just, made more comfortable in the ways of how you might grow as a young girl of 8 or 9 in that beautiful film, into that same role that the grandmother adopted. And you made choices later on that were not of that nature. So, I don't need to ask personal questions, obviously, but it is something that tradition was halted, and you made reference to it in the film about it being halted. Some of the residences, the dwellings were empty, and then you bring that sequence where you bring the food, it looked like to me, to an empty dwelling, or a dwelling that was occupied by a very infirm old person, was my guess. But I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about gender, in relationship to the film as a filmmaker, as a woman filmmaker, as a woman architect, and as the granddaughter of that very amazing saint of your grandmother. Not really a question, Nili. It's more just an observation, and I just wanted to hear you speak on the role of gender in this film, if it's relevant at all, and if it's not, that's also fine.
Yeah.
Just my curiosity.
Yeah, no, it's I don't. Maybe I will disappoint many of you, but it's not. Well, officially, I would say at her time, the women, she was very out of general. First of all, the fact that she went to a secular school. Girls at that time in Sfat never went to a secular school. This is thanks to her mother. And also, I mean, you see, this whole hotel was her project. She was very assertive. I mean, and she did everything. And when they did, like new building or additions in the hotel, she was sitting with the architect, in his office, and she did everything. She was really a character, really. So in that sense, I think, at that time there was no feminism and all of this, but she was a real, in that way. But on the other hand, she was also, I think what was most important to her was the family. And as I said, in Passover, she closed the hotel, although she could make a lot of money at that time from guests. She closed the hotel, and all the family from all Israel came to have this, Passover Eve. And she did everything. I mean, she did what the women did at that time. And also she ran the hotel, I mean, the hotel was really her project. And so in that sense, I think, and I believe if you ask me, I think this is the way things should be done. I don't think that, one has to have just a career or whatever, doing the other things. I tell you something. There was an exhibition in Israel about women architects, exhibiting projects that women architects did. Okay, and they invited me to present a project. Okay, I presented the project like I present everywhere, any exhibition, I don't know. And then they did a film. They interviewed in the film all the women architects who participated in the exhibition. They asked me about this thing. I mean, do you think that women architects, influence their design and all of these things, about what's the difference between women architect and men architect and all of this. And I must give, and I gave them the answer, which also disappointed them, which I think, they are very sensitive and maybe more architecture done by men because they are sensitive human beings. And there are women who is doing horrible architecture because they are horrible architects. And it's nothing to do with you being a woman, you do a better architecture because you're more sensitive and all of this. I really don't believe in that. And by the way, the filmmakers that I mentioned were all men. I never dealt with this issue because I don't know, I don't know. And I don't know if scientifically, I don't know if really there is difference in that sense, but of course. And I really appreciate the differences that are, and we have as women to enhance them and not want to be men. I never dealt with really consciously, with the issue of gender. But as I said in the film, which it was amazing because you see, when she was a child, her father died and she had to leave school at age 12. And she always told me that if she wouldn't leave school, she could go far, be, professor in university and whatever. Her brother became a chief judge in Israel.
Wow.
Yeah, my uncle, I mean, the whole family adored him and said, wow, wow, he's the chief judge. And she said also, if I could study like him, you know, he went to study law in England, and I had to keep the household because her mother had to be in the shop when her father died. And I think that she she went further than anybody. And every Passover and every holiday, the chief judge came to her hotel. And she made all this beautiful food for him. And I think you don't have to be a chief judge, you know. In some way, I replied.
Absolutely, Nili. Thank you so much. And it sounds to me like you are living your grandmother's dream. You are your grandmother's dream because you did get to go become educated, to go far, and to be speaking of us with us today. I so appreciate your path and your sharing of your personal family story. It was really beautiful.
I thank you for your question. Thank you.
Hi, Nili. I really enjoyed the film very much. I watched it 2 times.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It was beautifully done, and I found it very moving. And I guess I wanted to ask you just about the way that you ended the film. You quoted the Dalai Lama and spoke about every entity comes into existence in dependence on factors and conditions that they therefore they are impermanent, that they don't remain forever, they continually disintegrate. And when you read that quote in the movie, I was thinking about when she was washing the alley walls with the blue paint, there was sort of a place where the wall was disintegrating. And like that idea was beautiful to me. And then you spoke about wanting to get closer to the center of the one timeless way, and that we should push ourselves to create cities, villages, streets, and buildings in which man will feel at home in any place, in any culture, at any time. And I guess I wanted just to ask you about just that paradox of permanence and impermanence, and building to last, but things disintegrate and change and reuse, and just how you see that, how you bring that to your work, and how you maybe use those ideas to make decisions about what projects to take, and just how to bring that the theory and the complexity of these ideas to your practice.
This is a wishful thinking, you know.
Uh-huh.
I wish I was a real Buddhist. I wish. I'm trying hard, but I don't think I will get there. Well, the disintegration at the end, you know, it was like a metaphor, because my grandmother died. You know, things are not permanent. But if we take that into architecture, I think that the essence of the thing, or the main thing, is really that about I would say the cause and effect. Things are, of course, very much interrelated, you know, and in relation to one. There is nothing which has its intrinsic existence. Everything is you know, independent on other things. And this is the sort of interrelation between the parts and the whole and the environment and the you know, and the forces that are in the environment, etc., that has to be, you know, part of the, you know, take part in the whole process, or the methodology, or the way one is designing.
Well, there were a couple projects of yours that you highlighted in the film, and the one in particular, I think it was it a senior center with the courtyard?
Why I picked those for the film, you say?
Yes. Yeah.
You see, the Senior Citizen Day Center really is really a place where people feel at home. And I thought that this was really, I mean, this was one of my first public building I did, you know, 1988 in Tel Aviv. I took it was actually to show, you know, the pattern of a courtyard, which was just an example of what is a pattern and what generates a pattern, and the arcade and all of these things that I was talking about. So I thought that, this courtyard is a nice example. And then I say, well, the feeling you have in this courtyard, or in the courtyard in Sfat, or the courtyard in Greece, or whatever, has a very similar feeling, because the underlying structure is the same, which is the pattern. This was the issue of, I took it for an example for a pattern. And the music center, which I designed in the historic heart of Tel Aviv, I took it as an example to show actually one has to look on architecture as an organic system. When I thought about the building in that square, it's a very beautiful square in Tel Aviv, very old square. I didn't think about the building, but I thought about the square, because actually what makes the square are the buildings around it. So actually, you think about it as if virtually the building was there, and like in I don't know, like in the development of an embryo, like I showed, it's like, the building was there, and actually it was differentiated, from the square. You think, what would be the right thing to put here in order to enhance the feeling existing already in this square? And then you go deeper, and then you go to, inside the building, and etc. And what I said there is, the square, the building, the interior, the details, the chair, the land, everything is like a one continuous whole, one continuous system. I really don't believe that there is the architecture, urban design, interior design, conceptually, landscape design, and all these fragmented, this fragmentation that we have. I mean, I'm not saying that, you have to fire now all the interior designers, but in terms of way of thinking, or you really have to take all of this as a one coherent, system. And actually everything is differentiated and related, to the whole, or from the whole. So, and I think that the music center, that I really designed everything until the chairs and everything I designed myself, was, a good example, to show this idea about architecture being an organic system, like, the parts of the human being, and that each part is actually also, is part of the whole and is responsible on the whole at the same time. So this is why I chose this project.
Thank you very much. That was a beautiful answer too. Thank you.
And I think that if you would like, to understand more about all this, and how really this whole way of thinking came into practice with real examples, how I implemented it in, so I think the books really that, I published, mainly, the first one by edition Axel Menges, the holistic phenomenological approach to architecture. I think if anyone want to to understand more what I was, about this whole idea and how it was implemented, because I think that for me the main thing was, after working with Alexander and doing these researches and all, my personal interest was really to implement it into practice, and also to show the students that, it's not just a theory, but, it can be implemented. Otherwise, what are we talking about?
Your comment about the square and what makes the square, I thought was beautifully, there was the echo of that when you were in that courtyard, and you said, the first thing I do when I'm on a site is I figure out what I don't want to build on, what I'm going to preserve. Typically in architecture school, we do the site analysis and then you say, okay, where are you putting your building? We don't ask, where are you not putting your building, which is probably a better question. So I thought that was just the way you conveyed that in both those projects. I thought was really, really brilliant. Julio, you had a question regarding Buddhism.
You were raised in the movie, in the film, in the heart of the Kabbalah, or Jewish Kabbalah, as a place where all the different sects of Judaism, the Orthodox and the liberals and the Kabbalah, they all live together. You're just in this amazing spiritual tradition, millennial tradition of incredible Jewish spirituality, and yet you migrate to Buddhism, and much of your of course, there are all relationships, but my question is, can you say more about that? What was that make you move maybe from your tradition to this Eastern calling?
First time that I was actually exposed, to Buddhism when I did my postgraduate in Berkeley, because Berkeley has a lot of, these Buddhist centers, and also I went to study in the Far East department in the university. I don't know, but I must say that when people heard that I was interested in Buddhism, they said, okay, no wonder, because you are from Tzfat. Yeah, the city, of spirituality and Kabbalah and this. No, I tell you, I really absorbed, the spirit of maybe the Kabbalah or in Tzfat and all of this unconsciously, totally unconsciously. Never directly, even my family, it was in the town, it was in the city, but never learned, Kabbalah. But I also give hints there. Shimon Bar Yochai, who wrote Zohar, the most important book of the Kabbalah. My grandmother always she spoke about him, and she said that she feels safe because he's buried opposite, near the mountain, and as long as he's buried there, he takes care on her, and all of these kind of things. Oh, and there was a lot of superstitions going on there, but not directly, we're talking about the Kabbalah, and I went all the holidays, to the synagogue. And I think that the spirit in the synagogue is very similar to the spirit in the church and in the Zen monasteries. I mean, all these spiritual aspects and experiences are very much to do with what is common to us as human beings. And this is why this emotional experience, you can be a Jewish and go to a church, or you can be, I don't know, a Buddhist and go to a synagogue, and you feel very similar feeling, because it has something to do with something which is, which I said is common to us all as human beings, regardless what religion we are, what culture we come from. I got interested in Buddhism, and it started from there. And of course, then I started to get into it more. But when I read text, Buddhist text, or even text from the Kabbalah here and there, you only have to change the word and it's the same. Very, very similar way of thinking. Kabbalah was the mystic part of the Judaism, and of course Sufism and the Kabbalah is also the spiritual part of Judaism. It's not the Orthodox, and very similar.
Full film. I also watched it twice, and as spiritual as the narrative was, Natalie, I want to slowly transition my question into the practice of architecture, right? And I'm lucky to share the alma mater with Michael Crosbie at Catholic University School of Architecture. And I love the spiritual aspect of this. And I really paused at a message that I got in the scene of the apples that I think Michael brought up, which is about instant gratification. And that scene panned over to the bushel full of unpeeled apples, a lot of them, but only three slices of apples made it into the water. And it seemed like it was a 10-minute sequence where in fact it was probably only a couple of minutes, but it again spoke to the slowness and quietness of the film. And to me, there was sort of this challenge of, when are the rest of the apples going to be peeled and what is she making, right? And in architecture has kind of become that, you know, in that, you know, our clients are instant gratification people. I wish I can have the Dalai Lama as a client for every project that I do, but I don't, as a practitioner as well as an academician. And this notion of the phenomenology as a route to architecture or spirituality, and the sacred notion of architecture, and it could be as simple as a rusted metal door in an old wall that is just more powerful than, you know, a slick modern building that costs a lot of money. And so when I used to teach my theory class in graduate school, I would tell the students that the architect has a deceptive role in the profession. We have to lie, but in a good way. Because our clients, to use your courtyard as an example, you know, the client says, red is my favorite color, so the columns need to be painted red. And you're like, okay, we'll paint the columns red. But there's a hidden secret to the beauty of that courtyard that I don't need to let the client know about. I wonder if you can speak to that, both from obviously the beautiful spiritual grounding that came through in the film, but from a practice perspective, as an architect, you know, how do you meld those two when you have a client that says red is my favorite color?
You have to choose the right clients.
Do we sell our soul, or do we maintain our soul, hopefully, and try to still instill that sort of spiritual and sacred notion of architect, religion aside, right? While dealing with the reality of what people are looking for. They're looking for the rest of the apples to be peeled versus the three apples that got dropped in the pot of water.
As far as I'm concerned, I don't know if this is the only way, but architecture is made for people and not for the clients. And I'm not saying it's easy. You know, I could get hundreds and hundreds more projects if I would give up. You have few clients who choose you because the way you are leading, and this is, you're lucky, fantastic. You know, mostly private clients, you know, private houses and stuff like that. Of course, they choose the architect that they, you know, that they want. If you talk about, you know, institutions and stuff like that, and public buildings, you know, you're dealing also with clerks and people who, sometimes you're lucky. I was lucky with two mayors who was really appreciating, you know, the way that I was working. But I tell you what, when I came back from Berkeley, I was really going with flags. You know, I was very influenced by Chris Alexander, and I was very activist. You know, what I was teaching, I wanted also to teach my clients. What I taught, as you say, in the academia, in my students, and then I realized that it's not really the right way, and it will be between me and myself. I mean, all the buildings that I did, I designed on the site. They don't care how eventually they get the plans. If I go to the site and look at these trees and this, it's my business, okay? But I know that I did the right thing. But I tell you the truth, my target was not having, you know, an office with 100 employees. Mm-hmm. And really wanted to enjoy. I was like a painter, you know, having a studio. Mm-hmm. Luckily, you know, I did many projects, not as many as other architects I know did, because they were very easygoing. They did whatever the client wanted and all of this. They did all this garbage stuff. And okay, I mean, fair enough. It's okay. I mean, it's okay. But you know, for me, if you know, I went to study architecture not because anyone forced me to do it. Once I studied architecture, I had, you know, my own vision. You know, what am I doing it for? I tell you also, you know, even if you're teaching, I know many people who studied with me in Berkeley, and then they went teaching in other universities in United States, and they hardly taught what they studied. And I think it's very important. I mean, all the theories and everything that, you know, they would say, then what Alexander did, it's very important to teach as a tool of thinking, of appreciating the environment. I mean, it's really science of architecture. And many of my friends from Berkeley, they went to the universities. And because, you know, the department didn't really want them to teach it, and the pattern language, no, and this, no, and they want to get tenureship, and all, they gave up. And it's really pity. Now, I was teaching, you know, many of these things for many, many years in Israel. So it's the same. I mean, you have to decide what you live for. I mean, it's a very general question, you know. I don't think that Zaha Hadid and Rem Koolhaas have easier life. I tell you why, because they insist on their architecture also. So unless you know, people like it or whatever, one has, you know, his choices, but it's not very easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have to find a way, that's all.
Good. And your film is a really wonderful documentation of that way. And I want to thank you again for being with us today and talking about your film. And I want to wish you good luck and blessings for the rest of your journey.
I really, I enjoyed very much this meeting, and please, all of you, keep in contact. There is an advantage also, because like this, you have a group of people from many places, which is also nice. You know, if anyone want to watch the film or recommend to friends to watch the film, it is on the Vimeo for $1.99. It's also a good answer for your question. I can take $15, but I said no, $1.99. Never make money.
Really, on behalf of ACSF, thank you so much for spending your time and sharing your gifts with us.